Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar on the importance of independent social work reports. I'm joined today by Laurence Chester of Alphabet Social Work. Thanks so much for being with us today, Laurence. We really appreciate it.
Good afternoon, a real pleasure.
For those of you who don't know me, my name's Amy. I'm an immigration and public law solicitor and a consultant at DG Legal. And I'll be co-hosting with Laurence today to discuss this really interesting topic for immigration practitioners. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get going, if that's okay. We are in webinar mode today, which means that Laurence and I can't see and can't hear you, but hopefully you've got no issues in seeing and hearing us. If there are any technical problems along the way and you do have any difficulties, please just drop me a message in the chat box and I'll do my best to fix it. Again, similarly, if you have any questions that crop up during the course of the webinar, please do use the chat and Q&A facilities to communicate with us. Laurence has very kindly said that he will try his best to answer any questions that do arise, either throughout the course of the webinar or if we have time at the end. In the event that we run out of time, which is quite possible, he's also very kindly said that any questions that we haven't had time to get through during the course of the webinar, he will answer via email and we can send out a summary sheet with all those questions and answers in to everyone who's signed up afterwards. So thank you for that. And finally, a copy of the slides and a link to the recording will be sent out tomorrow to everyone who has attended. So thanks for being here. The webinar is going to basically be in two parts today. Firstly, we will have Laurence talking about the importance and the role of the independent social worker and how crucial these are in immigration cases. And we're then going to move on to a Q&A discussion session where I'm going to be putting some of what I think are the key questions for immigration practitioners to put to social workers concerning their reports. And then time for questions and answers at the end, time permitting. So I will hand over to Laurence and disappear just for a few moments.
Firstly, let me thank you, Amy, and I'd like to thank DG Legal for facilitating this session. And I'd like to thank all the participants because I know how valuable your time is. So first of all, I'd like to, if we can move this. Oh, Amy's being my technical assistant as well and is clicking on the slides for me, which is great. So Amy, if you could please go next to the next slides. Okay. Here we go. So this is a bit about me. I've had quite an interesting experience as a social worker, not one that is usual. And I'll talk more about that as we go along. Next slide. So a bit about me. This is my grandfather's, great-grandfather's naturalization papers from the Home Office. I'm third generation in this country, and what I always find quite funny about this thing is they've got my grandmother's name completely wrong, and I think it's interesting to see that errors have a long history to them in these paperwork, and that is why it's crucial that we must always check that the information is right. But nonetheless, it didn't stop them from living here, and here I am talking to everybody here about what is an important issue. Words on paper don't tell a full story. Each of us are unique and have our own stories. A good social work report should be able to animate and give depth to people's life. And this is especially important for Article 8, and this agenda will hopefully help us understand how we can best do that. Next slide. I want to talk a bit about what we do. So this is standard for the social workers who are watching. This is something that you'll be very familiar with. I want to demystify a bit of what we do in social work. So this is a strong part of it. So when I write a report for families in immigration cases, I look at their basic care. I go through these headings often and compare about their life in this country to what it might be like in another country. and it's helpful in trying to give some weight to the assessment we are doing of the impact on children, especially of immigration decisions. Next slide, please. So this is a statutory framework that I tend to work within, and a lot of this will be familiar to you all. There is the Home Office Section 55 duty regarding the welfare of the children, which I'll come to during the course of this presentation and offer my thoughts about that. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. I want to show you another part of the toolbox that we as social workers use, and that is the welfare checklist. It's central in all court-based decisions made where there will be an impact on children, that the welfare checklist is considered. What I find troubling is that I very rarely see a decision made where there isn't social work involvement, where these matters are actually considered. Often I will see the Home Office refer to generic outline about children in general, but the Children Act is really clear about the need to focus on the specific needs of each child specifically, and that they need to do an assessment and consider these elements. It's the law. So part of what we do as social workers is respond to the welfare checklist, and in my reports I ensure that all these areas are covered. So worth bearing that in mind. It can also help how you instruct social workers as well. If I could have the next slide, please. So I thought I'd go into some examples of the instructions I receive. And this isn't meant to be overly critical. It's a reality of people trying to instruct social workers without being really clear about what it is we do. What I find, my experience is that the quality of a good report can often be affected by the quality of the instructions I'm given. I want the solicitor to understand that the family is wider than just those in the household. So really, I should be asked to talk about the wider family network, etc. Also, I'm asked about what integration issues there would be facing the family going back to a country. It's not specifically Bangladesh, it can be any country. And for this, you can get in-country reports, but I'll talk a bit later about why I actually have quite a unique perspective on what the definition of integration is. You'll see in these instructions, and it's very common, there's a lot of repetition. In the most recent set of instructions I got, there were 6 points, all of which repeated each other, but just reworded. In those situations, I either refer back to the solicitor if there's time, and give some helpful advice about how perhaps we could get more from my work with perhaps better instructions. But as crucial, it is crucial, because if my instructions give an overview of the case, a case where father is, for example, I've recently had a case where father is already deported but applying to return. I want to know about what that really means. What's the experience of the father in his home country? And then I can talk to the children in a way that relates to it. There's part of the recent refusal decisions I've seen, they've been quite specific in asking for more information from a qualified psychologist or social worker. I'm not a solicitor, so I don't quite understand why this same obligation is not put on the Home Office. If we can just move on to the next slide, please. So the Home Office often talk about significant obstacles and say there are no issues to reintegration back, or there are issues around integration, but nobody actually defines what integration means. And it is a very specific term, which I believe gets lost often in the process. And in 2001 to 2006, I was working with the Home Office on defining and promoting a very clear definition of integration. I contributed to Integration Matters. I chaired the groups around refugee children's integration, housing integration, health as well, there's different subgroups. And we came up with this definition. And in my reports, when I'm asked to do so, to look at what are the issues around significant obstacles, and sometimes unduly harsh, but mainly significant obstacles, and the ability of a family or an individual to reintegrate. I look at the employment, housing, education, and health issues, as well as the others, and do a comparison about what life is in this country with those headings, as compared to the country that the Home Office believe that this person should be removed to or deported to. My perspective is independent. I'm not an advocate. I actually just want to make sure that the information I'm providing is more whole than that which I may have already seen. And so it's a matter of giving the court the information they need to make the right decisions. And this is really important. If we can move on to the next slide, please. Sometimes I think, with due respect to the Home Office, they just say stuff without any foundation. This was the further information I received about the way that the Home Office have made their decisions about this family without giving any assessment or view about the individual children's needs. They talk about there being in different countries a generic resource, like it might be in India or Bangladesh, without acknowledging that the family's home address may be on the other side of that country, will cost money, it's not feasible, it's not practical. They won't go into that detail. And so it does concern me. And it is difficult sometimes to understand why the courts are not being more challenging of the Home Office to say, well, how do you know that's true for that child? So if we can move on to the next slide, please. And it comes down to refusal reasons. And I really get frustrated. Every so often, I lose my hair over the things the Home Office just say, which are bizarre. They will say that and this is something which upset me and will certainly make the social workers in this session more than a bit curious about, when they say a very little weight can be given to that child as they are preschool. Well, that is wholly inaccurate for a number of reasons. First of all, any of us who have young children under the age of school age know that children do have very clear views about wishes and feelings. But furthermore, under Article 12, as a social worker, as an expert, you can represent their views. Plus, you don't need to just go into that alone. There's also the evidential impact that there is strong research about the impact of parental separation from young children. And in fact, I would argue, understanding the needs of preschool children is in fact every bit as important, and to some degree, you could make the case even more important than older children, because younger children are forming their attachments. If you have a child who has lived with a parent from 0 to let's say 2 even, and if during that time they have disruptive attachments issues, they can be in fact affected for the rest of their lives in how they form attachment with others. So the idea of them not having a voice in these matters is really concerning. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So I sometimes wish, and I understand there are Home Office people in this session even, I sometimes wish I could just directly ask the Home Office these questions. How can you determine what the best interest of a child is without ever assessing them? How can you know what their wishes and feelings are, as is required under Article 12 in the Children's Act, without ever asking or talking to them? should it really be the burden on the applicant? This is the Section 55 duty, surely. Also, what definition of integration is being used for determining what is being considered as significant obstacles? Because when I read refusal decisions, I often don't see the headings that I've referred to as being important. When seeking to separate a parent from their family, how has it been determined that direct contact would be counter to the child's best interest? Something which I think should be eliminated from the documents are comments like, this child can maintain their relationship with their parent via means of video or social media. I've seen it in countless refusal letters, and it is just not the case. It's a breach of Section 9, which is really clear about the need for direct contact. It contravenes everything we know about attachment between children and parents. And they often know, the Home Office often no basis for that assumption. So it is concerning that the system does not seem to be fully appreciative of the rights of children. As social workers, we give voice to children. We give voice to families who feel that they have been misrepresented or misunderstood. And we are duty bound to be honest and open and transparent, with our primary duty being to the court. To read out a judgment of a case which I just recently have dealt with, it says, in essence, the case is that the appellant who was deported is a guiding hand in the lives of his sons, and that his absence in their lives would be devastating. These are assertions of the appellant, sponsor, and the parent. They are interested parties. I have not been provided with a report from an independent child psychologist or social worker specializing in this field. And I thought, Eureka, it's good to hear the court saying that that perspective is needed. It would have been even better if they would have said, and it should have been the Home Office that looked into these issues in advance and assault that. But we are where we are. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. And so now we're going to get on to some Q&A. And the reason we're doing it this way, hands up, webinars aren't something I do regularly. And I was concerned that in my presentation, it might come over as a bit stilted or a bit all over the place. So Amy has very kindly agreed to mentor me in this and maybe ask some of the questions that lawyers would be interested in. I can see lots of questions in the columns, but we'll go with this Q&A first, and then I'll try and get back to some other answers.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. And apologies for my delay with slides, everybody. I'm not very technical either. Did my best.
You're brilliant. That's fine.
So as a lawyer, I guess the questions that I really wanted to understand were, who is it that independent social workers prepare reports for? Is it just children and families, or is it much broader than that?
It's broader than that. I worked, for example, I wrote a report for a young gay man who was facing deportation to a country where his rights would have been severely compromised. And he had a lot of social connections in this country and none in his home country. So I was able to write a report in support of that. And I think it helps to have like a country profile report for, in this case, what the experience is for gay people in that country. But I will do things like, I'm interested in researching what there is to learn about the home country life for gay people in that country, or whatever else it is. For elderly people, we've had a lot of reports. I've done quite a lot of reports recently about grandparents or adults who have been in this country for the past 2 years, unable to return and now want to stay here. All kinds of things. So yeah, we can do broader reports than just children and families.
Thank you. And you just mentioned there that you've been involved in doing reports for families who've stayed in the country longer. Is that something that's arisen as a result of COVID, do you think? That
yes,
we could perhaps be expanding on the types of applications and the evidence that we submit in those as a consequence of the pandemic and family life developing in different ways, and families not wanting to be separated?
So I've done quite a few recently where grandparents came to stay prior to COVID. COVID kicked in whilst they were here. They then could not go back, and their health has deteriorated. Sometimes a partner has died during that period, sometimes from COVID. For example, and the children have formed a very close attachment to their grandparents living with them, and vice versa. And during this period of time, for example, it's gone one of two ways. For example, I was working with parents who both worked in the health profession, so they were nurses, doctors. So the grandparents were babysitting while they were helping the NHS. They were working unbelievable shifts. And so children very young, one of them who was just newly born, and so spent the first 2 years with their primary attachment figure being their grandparents. And so then you have to ask yourself, this is a different situation. It's an unusual situation, special circumstances, you could almost say. And it's about talking about what that attachment between child and grandparents is, the impact on the children if the grandparents were to be removed, and also the impact on the parents, because sometimes elderly people are being asked to go back to live in circumstances which are pretty dire following COVID, where infrastructure has been decimated and they are isolated, and all their neighbours have moved away. So yeah, it can be really quite traumatic for them, and it's difficult to hear their stories sometimes. And it's important that we shine a light on every aspect of a family life to aid the Home Office and the court make the right decisions for these families. I hope I've answered that fully for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. It's really interesting to hear that, because I do think that there are an awful lot of cases at the moment where it's not the traditional family being separated, child being separated from parents, that the cases that we're making at the moment. So yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. You mentioned a moment ago about a country expert report, and that's something that I just wanted to touch on, because in many applications, and particularly appeals, we are instructing country experts as well as independent social work reports. Yeah. How useful is it for the independent social worker to have the country expert report as part of their instructions, so that they can see what the country expert's opinion is on the possibility of return?
So to give an example, it's really, really helpful. For example, we often hear, like, if a father's been deported or removed, that the children can go and join him, or the family can go and join him, without consideration of the fact that children may be British citizens and not be eligible to access local services, or they may not be even available. A case I was working on recently, they think that a 15-year-old and a 14-year-old can go and join their father in India, without any consideration of the fact that these are two children completely integrated into the system here, including their education, and they would lose all their education if they were to go to India. And that's not factored. It's not mentioned, it's not considered. So having in-country experts being able to advise about what it's likely to mean for the family going back, or a grandparent going back to live in an isolated village which has flooding once, twice a year, and no electricity, no nothing, yet they're expected to use social media as their means of maintaining family life. Those kind of perspectives are very, very helpful. And when instructing them, I would please ask, use the definitions for integration that I've put in these slides as being some of the areas to ask them to consider.
Thank you. Moving on just ever so slightly, I guess, from my question about expert reports, then, when you receive instructions from a solicitor to prepare a report, what documents ideally do you want to see? Can you tell us specific ones, or just more broadly an idea of generally what you would expect to see?
I'd usually want the bundle, but the bundle sometimes doesn't include everything because it's not sought. For example, if we want to say that a parent or a grandparent has a close relationship with a school-age child, well, if there is a report from that child's school saying that this child brings them to school, they've seen them at open evenings, he or she is active in the child's life and attends parents' evenings, etc., then that report is really important. Also, there's, as I said, remembering that family are not just a household. So, for example, if it's a grandparent or even just a parent or a child, what other family is there to whom they are important in this country? And then what I often encourage is to get as many letters of support as possible, especially from doctors, if you've got any doctors in the family or can get from the GP, schools, if there's any nurses in the family, teachers, anybody that can give a third-party professional view on what this family are doing, and that they are a family, the role that the people who are subject to the proceedings, what is their engagement with the family, how involved with the children are they, etc. All of that information is helpful.
Thank you. Slight question on a similar topic, I guess, really, is in relation to the instructions that you receive from solicitors that accompany these documents for you to consider.
Yeah.
As lawyers, obviously, particularly legal aid lawyers, we're under a lot of pressure in terms of time, and we understand that. But from a legal perspective, we can't expect independent social workers to produce a wonderfully on-point report if we don't direct you specifically to the issues that we want you to address. With that in mind, bearing in mind some of the instructions that you do receive, can you give me some views on what makes good instructions, bad instructions?
So a plea. Please be clear with your language about removal, deportation, and it being an application. I understand that solicitors are really busy and sometimes they cut and paste instructions over from one client to another. But I have to copy those instructions and put them in my report so that the other parties can see what I was instructed to do. And so it is important that the language is right. And please don't just do cut and paste. Look through it and think about what is specific for this family. Make it relevant for the family, and be clear about whether you want to know if this is about the impact of being deported, and if so, then I need to understand about has there been any offences since? I will need to know all of that. What are the circumstances of that? And has the parent learned from that, and have they been engaged in good, purposeful activities to show they are a benefit to the community as opposed to a risk to the public interest, etc. And that's why it's so important to know. And if it's not deportation, then then I know we're looking at almost different thresholds around what the courts will balance out for consideration of the best interests of the children. So that's important. But please try to avoid cutting and pasting as much as possible.
Absolutely. Noted. Can I ask a question just in practical terms? When you receive instructions to complete an independent social work report, how does that work? What's the process? What do you do?
Right. So I usually get a phone call from a solicitor or even a parent or adult, it depends, from anywhere. If it's coming direct from a client, I refer them back to their solicitors and say, and advise them that the best way to work with me is with the solicitor where I can receive formal instructions, because that will enable me to work in a targeted way. Then I usually get a phone call from a solicitor who 9 times out of 10 will tell me the report was needed last week. So can I fit it in today or something, or within the next week? And so we have a chat about realistic timescales and also about cost, etc. And I usually would like to know if it's legal aid or privately funded, because I work differently depending on what that is. Then if an interpreter is needed, an independent interpreter, then I will ask the solicitor to arrange a Zoom. I will set up a Zoom meeting and then ask the solicitor to share that with the interpreter and the family, and then we'll do the interview that way. Otherwise, then I'll ask the solicitor to give me the contact number for the client, and I'll call them. And since lockdown, and I've continued doing it, the interviews are usually over WhatsApp. And I think that this saves on costs for the client, i.e. travel costs, etc. And the clients tell me they feel more comfortable because they don't have to tidy up their whole house beforehand for a stranger to come in. And also, people are still worried about COVID. So I think it's perfectly reasonable to do these interviews on WhatsApp. If there was reasons that it couldn't be, then I'm more than happy to visit, but it usually works out best to do it via video. And then after that, I write the reports. I usually try and write the report within 10 days of the interview, and then get it to the solicitor, and then I get their corrections or any changes they want. And I usually do a turnaround within usually the same day or within 24 hours. Is there anything more you need to know? I'm not sure.
I think I'm just quite interested to know, in a, let's say, traditional scenario where we are instructing you to prepare a report in relation to a child being potentially separated from our parents.
Yeah.
How do you speak to that child, and how do you build a rapport with them?
Well, as you see behind me, I'm on Starship Enterprise. And if you didn't recognize it was Starship Enterprise, it means you're probably a lot younger than me. I don't know. But I also have backdrops with balloons, with robots, and all sorts of things. I have little toys I use. I have a spinning bow tie and a magic collapsible magic wand. This is for the younger children who really enjoy that. And I find that it's easier to form a connection with them doing it this way than turning up at the house and then expecting this child to engage with me in that way. It's harder. I've found this has been pretty effective in getting their attention. So I've really enjoyed doing these interviews this way. And yeah, and I build up rapport. For me, this mustn't be a trauma for children. I check with the family, first of all, how much does the child know about what I'm talking to them about? And I have what I call my 10 magic questions, which are questions I ask children, which are about general stuff to build up a picture of who the child is. And if they aren't fully aware of what's going on, I'll ask them, how would you feel if your mum or dad went on holiday for a long time, or something like that, to get a sense about how they feel about separation. So it very much depends on the age of the child. But overall, a differential approach. With teenagers, I'm more direct. I will talk to them as adults. Yeah, they can be trickier because a lot of teenagers don't like saying, I love my dad and I would miss him, or I love my mum and I would miss him. They find it hard. So I have to really ask them to dig deep. And I've developed a good knack of building that rapport with young people and helping them understand that, that they need to park the adolescence bit and actually talk from the heart.
Absolutely. Who else do you speak to when you're compiling these reports? Is it usually just the child, or do you speak to the child, the parents? Is it more broad than that?
Yeah, it depends.
Are there other people that you interview?
Depends. Tomorrow night, I'm talking to a parent who is in Zambia, and they are joining a Zoom link with the family in this country. So I will speak to whoever will get it done for me to get the right report. I have to work on instruction from solicitors, of course, but for me as a social worker, we have quite, and I don't know if people really appreciate this always, social workers, we are duty bound to act in the best interest of the child, regardless of what anybody else says. So if a solicitor says don't talk to the child, I will challenge that solicitor. if I am asked by anybody to do anything that does not represent the best interest of the child, I am duty bound under my practice regulations to ensure that that is challenged. So I think that I will always do that. And that is how we have that degree of trust from the court that we will offer an independent, transparent report.
Thank you. I think I've just got one final question from me, and then I'll have a look at the questions that we've received from the webinar. I was just really interested, Laurence, to know what your opinion is on that classic phrase that we see so frequently in Home Office refusal letters, about how a family can continue to be in contact and maintain their relationship by the use of modern means of communication. It's that old chestnut that we keep seeing so frequently. What's your view on that?
Well, first of all, how do they know? Where's the evidence? Prove it. Prove that this child can maintain a relationship with their parent but via that means, and show how every bit of childcare research and practice, Bowlby attachment onward, show why that is not right, because and why Article 9 of UNCRC is wrong, which is really clear about direct contact. I think it's really important as social workers that we bring families to life, that the Home Office understand and the judiciary understand. We are talking about real people here. We aren't talking about people trying to swindle a system to get into the countries to get something they don't deserve. Every time we separate a child from their parent, we are traumatizing that child, and it can have lifelong effects on them. And I just think it's so crucial that we do not accept that as a legitimate response, and the courts shouldn't either. And I think it's shame on the Home Office when they say that, because it's neglectful of their Section 55 duties, certainly. So I think that the Home Office need to change how they think about these issues.
Thank you. It's good to hear that you have the same view on that line as many of the immigration practitioners I know do as well. It was really helpful. Thank you for addressing all of my questions. I'm going to have a quick look at the ones that we've received in the chat and put those to you, if that's okay. You just bear with me. So, quick question. I'm going from the top to the bottom. If I think anything's already been covered, I'm going to skip over it. Please forgive me if I do miss your question, and I'll try and come back to it if you send me a quick message if I have missed it.
Or Amy, they can call me. They can email me or call me as well if they think that you're being too harsh on them, unduly harsh on them.
Kind.
They can.
very, very, very kind. Question here is, what's your lead time? So I presume in terms of turning your reports around, I think you may have touched on that. But
yeah, I'll do an interview. Yeah, interview and then turn it around in 10 days. How much time do I need to advance depends on how it's going. Usually anywhere between 2 and 4 weeks at the moment, depending. And it depends on time of year as well. Around Christmas time, January, it tends to go quite quiet because I think people are spending their money on Christmas presents or whatever. I don't know, but it does tend to go quiet around December, January time. So it depends on time of year. But yeah.
Would you recommend that even if someone's facing a very short deadline, they need a quick turnaround, still get in touch and ask the questions?
Oh, absolutely. Because sometimes I will talk to solicitors, other solicitors, say, do you mind if this is urgent? I also get solicitors actually who've been in touch to say they don't need a report till like June. So, and they want to reserve their space, which I strongly, strongly recommend, because sometimes if you get in touch with me, I won't be able to do it. So really try and do it as quickly as possible. But I am committed and dedicated. It's a passion of mine to help families in this situation get the right decisions made for them. So if there's a family in distress and they really need an urgent report, give me a call. And if I can't do it, I'll try and refer on to somebody who might be able to.
Perfect. That question was from Julian. I hope that answers your question in enough detail. Question from Harjinder. Could you explain in what way a social worker's report would differ from a psychologist's report when dealing with the impact of removal of one parent?
Yeah, so psychologists can write a really helpful report often, and I work with a psychologist who's a friend of mine, and she does them as well, and she can help. But sometimes having both reports are really helpful. Social workers tend to go more on the broader family, like Article 8 stuff, and we can look at the context behind that and so on. The psychologist will focus on the psychology or the psychological impact on that particular child. We will cover the whole triangle, as that I showed you earlier, which is what the psychologist doesn't do necessarily. We will cover the triangle and also the welfare checklist. That's also our bag, as it were. But I think that if there are resources to get a psychologist report and a social work report, then that can be pretty powerful.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Question from Ali. Hi, Ali. Fellow ISW here. Please, could you advise of your views on the application of the Mental Capacity Act in independent social work assessments?
Well, it's so the Mental Capacity Act, right? That sometimes in social work, when we do assess families, if we're working with families who have, for example, diminished mental health and are not able to fully represent their views, then we will call in expert assessors, such as call them PAMs or parenting assessors, whatever. But the Home Office tend not to pay much regard to Mental Health Act, but I do, and so I will highlight in my reports their rights or accessing services where this is an issue. It's really about how it applies to the specific case. So yeah, it's a difficult one to answer in full without a specific case. But what I would say is that part of our role is to highlight that where relevant legislation applies, and if the person was returned to the country where they're being removed or deported to, how that may impact on them, and is it a reasonable consequence?
Perfect, thank you. And sort of a slightly linked question, I guess, here in relation to mental capacity. Someone has asked, could you explain whether you feel that an independent social worker can comment on or prepare a report which comments on the capacity of someone suffering from mental health problems to learn and to assimilate and recall information?
Right, so there are social workers called AMPs who do have some qualifications to be able to do that, but I think you're best off with a psychology report or a specialist mental health social worker who are called AMPs. Yeah, they need to have a specific background in doing that. And if you're getting an independent social worker to do that, I don't have this, but you would want a social worker who has good experience of working in mental health teams and has a background, qualifications, training and qualifications to do so.
Okay, thank you. Great question from Anna here. Do you ever get doubted, harassed or questioned by Home Office officials for defending an applicant or showing a biased approach?
No, never. And let them try, because I would never do that. I have acted and the Home Office know that I am not somebody who's just out against Home Office. I've represented them in conferences in Europe, and I've represented them in negotiations with other governments in Albania, and I've done a lot of work for the Home Office in helping them develop their work. So any criticism I make of the Home Office or observations is about me just wanting them to be better at what they do.
Sure, thank you. We've got a few questions that have come up, Laurence, about timescales for reports and fees for reports. Can I suggest that anyone wanting to talk to you about fees, can they email you directly to get confirmation of fees and things?
Yeah, with pleasure.
Perfect, thank you. Question from James. At what level of experience can a social worker produce a report? Does it depend on the complexity?
I don't really have an exact answer for that. I've been doing social work for 26 years. The question to ask yourself is, what would the court think about this social worker's experience? And I suppose that's the critical question. If a social worker claims to have expertise which they don't have, they're in breach of their registration. And they really need to be open and honest with you about what they can and can't do. And I think you have to take a view on that. If somebody comes to you and says, I've been a social worker for a year and I'm an expert, well, you have to say, well, I don't think so. You could say, how long do you have to be a lawyer before you're an expert in something? You know, it's a matter of what have you done with your time? And yeah, you have to show some longevity, I would say. For me, I usually, in other areas, if somebody's been, I suppose, around 10 years is kind of my kind of thing. But I'm sure other people would be softer and say maybe 5 or 6 years is enough. But depends on the complexity, as you say.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Great question from Ruth. Hi, Ruth. We generally deal with cases where the Home Office will argue that the whole family can return and continue family life.
Yeah.
So, for example, with young children, if their prime relationship is with their parents and no one else involved, then it's not unreasonable for them to all leave the UK together. Ruth's saying she'd be interested to know if and how you would argue or deal with that case.
Well, that's bread and butter, because the Home Office are always saying that without evidencing it. How do they know? That's my question, is where's the assessment by the Home Office saying that this child, little Jimmy, whatever you want to call him specifically, will be fine going to live in that country? The other thing is that if they're British citizens, why should they? You know, as a social worker, I would say it's manifestly against the best interest of a child to give up their rights that they have in this country, the access to education, free healthcare, and the whole way of life here, compared to another country where they won't have that. And I think that is an unfair expectation to put on a family. And they shouldn't have to do it just to preserve their Article 8 rights. And so then in my reports, I will ask about, you know, does the child have attachments in this country? They may not have immediate family, other immediate family, but no family is an island. Are they part of a local community? You know, what stress will this move put on the family? Will they be moving to a situation of destitution? Will they have, what life are they moving to? You know, what life is it that they're moving to, and what life are they moving from? I then compare them and think about what is the child's best interest, and you know, and the evidence from the Home Office is usually lacking.
I think in my own experience, and I think this is the point that Ruth's making, is it's the Home Office generally tend to come back at you and say, well, if a family are being removed back to a country of origin together as a family unit, then that is in the best interests of that family, because being a family unit sort of trumps all other issues. And as long as they're together, wherever they are, then that's in their best interests. And so what you're saying is actually you need to look much more broadly at what is in each individual family member's best interests, rather than just saying, well, you're together, therefore it's better wherever you are that
Absolutely.
You're together.
Absolutely, because it depends on what they're going to. Article 8 is about family life, but also for home and other aspects of Article 8. And if the only part of Article 8 that is going to be achieved is that the child will be with the parents, even though they'll be street homeless with no education, no health support or anything else, no reasonable person would say that is fulfilling Article 8. So it's a matter of, how do the Home Office know that?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Another question is, as immigration practitioners, do you expect us to have an understanding of the Children Act, for example, as part of the instructions that we put to you? Or is it sufficient for us to simply say, how do you consider that it would impact the child?
Latter. I don't expect solicitors to know the Children Act, although I would. It's worth a read through. It really is. It's very interesting. And the debate, and I've been doing this work I was the first person in this country to get a master's degree in social work with unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. At that point, nothing had been written. There was not a textbook. And things have moved on a long way in understanding how the Children's Act applies to refugee and asylum-seeking children. And the debates between the Home Office, some of which I've been part of, the balance between the Children's Act and immigration legislation is a fine balance. And I know it's something that judges have given great thought to over the years. And it seems that it is a bit of a seesaw. Some judges go one way and others go the other way. And our role as social workers is just to make sure the court has the right information to be able to make that difficult balanced decision correctly. But we cannot expect all lawyers to know the Children's Act, but I think you should have an awareness of its core principles.
Perfect, thank you. And just one more question, again from Ali. Thanks, Ali. As an independent social worker experienced and skilled at assessing care and support needs for those with a range of disabilities, including young people, adults and older people, I'd be interested to understand your approach to disability-related assessments and the assessment of the cared for and the person with care and support needs.
Right, so I don't undertake direct assessments of their disability. I will read the reports that have been made by, for example, if somebody has a disability, they will usually have their own care plan or information or reports, and I would reference the reports. I would not undertake a direct assessment of somebody's mental health, because that needs to be a clinician, or of their physical health, because that needs to be done by a medical practitioner. What I would do is review the documents. And if it was a condition that was beyond my expertise, I would refer back to the solicitor and say, can that be covered by a health professional or whatever?
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers your question, Ali. I think we've covered pretty much everything that's come up in the Q&A and the chat, as far as I can tell. I'm having a quick look to see if I've missed anything in here. Oh, I found some more, please bear with me. A question on, is there any particular template report for an independent social work report, or is every report different?
God, avoid templates, please. I think everybody, I have the initial bit is my template. I'm a social worker, these are my experiences. So, you know, those bits, and the DOJ bit about I've been advised of the duties of expert witness, those bits. But anything in regard to the family, no two families are the same. I try to avoid templates as much as possible. I do have headings that I will talk to. If that's what you mean by a template, I will work to certain headings, but they will be the instructions. My instructions will be my headings. And then I will put an analysis conclusion, and I'll put the welfare checklist stuff in there as well. But mainly my headings are from the instructions I'm given.
Thank you. Question from John. Have you ever concurred with a Home Office recommendation?
No, I have. The thing is, I usually get asked to do these reports when the Home Office, the solicitors feel the Home Office haven't paid due regard to the children. I haven't always fully, there are times when I don't fully agree with what is being said by the applicant, but that, you know, is a matter for the solicitor to address. But in general, I very rarely see a Home Office refusal decision where they are talking about a detailed assessment of the family and the children, and that's what they base their decision on. In actual fact, I can't remember seeing one, which is why I get quite animated about it.
Yeah, understandably. Last question from Ali again, and I think it's a good one. She says, how as social workers, and I'm going to include lawyers in there too, really, if you don't mind, can we move towards a position where children with unsettled status can access the same legal protections and representation as children in other proceedings in the UK?
You see, the thing is, as children access, they should. So, you know, and as a long-term advocate for children who come to this country on their own, and are thought to be adults before really anybody knows how old they are, etc. I think children have always had a raw deal in this country, not just from the Home Office or whatever, but from services in general, from local authorities often don't fully appreciate their needs. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a tough one.
Yeah, much like every situation, I think, with the Home Office and unrepresented clients, we just have to keep fighting and keep trying and do the best that we possibly can as lawyers and as independent experts.
Yeah, definitely. And I would encourage as many solicitors as possible to do pro bono work for people like unaccompanied young people if needed, or wherever you see that injustice, because it is important that we help the people who are incredibly vulnerable. They're not experts in their own situation, which the Home Office seems to think they are sometimes, and they don't know what they're meant to be doing. So, and a lot of them do get exploited by unscrupulous people, as I'm sure everybody in this meeting knows. So it's important for us to reach out as much as possible to help people.
Okay, thank you, Laurence. Just in summary then, I'm going to hand over to you and just say, obviously the title of this webinar was to talk about how crucial independent social work reports are in immigration cases. Tell us really how important are they?
Without them, the Home Office say things which are just not true. Assumptions are made about families which are not true. And they will say things that will undermine the best interests of the children, and it goes unchallenged unless a social worker challenges it. It is essential for families' voices to be heard, for children's voices to be heard, and the only way of doing that in a way that the court recognises is actually by a social worker. Psychologists can write a report about the child, but the social workers are the experts considered to be the people to utilise when you want to ensure the voice of children is heard in proceedings.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Just to mention also, I know Laurence just a moment ago said that he hates templates, but as part of our preparation for this webinar, we have actually prepared some free templates should anyone want to access them. One being a list of useful documents to send to an independent social worker when you're submitting your instructions, and one that is largely a draft of a sample set of instructions. Obviously, it's very broad because each case is different and must be amended. But we figured that these were quite useful tools for solicitors who are busy in day-to-day practice, and it might just give you a few pointers in terms of what's needed and how it might make your life a little bit easier if you've got a template to work from. So again, we're happy to send those out to anyone who may wish to receive a copy, and we hope that they are helpful. I just want to say a huge thank you to Laurence for joining us today and for taking the time out to deliver this webinar. I really hope it's been useful to everyone. It certainly was really useful for me to listen to. If I've missed anyone's question, I apologise profusely. I've tried to make sure I've covered as many as I can see, but there may be a couple that slipped through the net. If they have, please feel free to email them to Laurence directly. You've got his contact details there on the slide, or alternatively, you can email me specifically. It's Amy, AMIE, at dglegal.co.uk, or you've got the generic admin at dglegal.co.uk email address there as well. We will send a copy of the slides and a link to the recording out to everybody who has joined tomorrow. That will be en route. And if anyone's got any suggestions for me as to what other useful webinars we might be able to put on in the future, then again, please drop me a quick email, and I'd be very happy to see what we can do to try and facilitate. But for now, thank you, Laurence. We really appreciate it, and good afternoon, everybody.